When looking back at music history in the United States, we begin to notice shifts in consumption and mass appeal of different genres of music that occur. Many of these shifts are sparked by one band or album that captures the moment and moves the musical pantheon forward and begs it to evolve. When examining these shifts, there's one that stands out in particular: Nirvana. After a decade dominated by big hair and synthesizers, Nirvana's release of Nevermind represented a shift back to the popularity of traditional guitar-based rock bands and the rise of the hardcore punk movement that began in the 80s into mainstream prominence in the early 90s. Nirvana, of course, only survived until 1994, but their influence and unwitting creation of a new genre, grunge and later alternative rock, was continually guided and influenced by one of Nirvana's most prominent and innovative members, drummer, musician, and all-around innovator Dave Grohl. Dave's music career began in Washington, D.C., where he started a hardcore punk band with some friends from school called Dane Bramage. While he was in Dane Bramage, another local outfit of punks called Scream released a single called Walking by Myself. This song inspired Dave, and when Dane Bramage eventually broke up and there was an opening in Scream for a new drummer, Dave enthusiastically joined the outfit. After relentless touring, Scream eventually made its way out to San Francisco, where they played a show in which Nirvana's Chris Novoselic and Kurt Cobain were in attendance. The band had currently just lost their fifth drummer and were looking for a new drummer to fill that gap and also add some new elements to the band, like some great background vocals. They noticed Dave's talent both on the drum kit and with background vocals and approached him after the show. Eventually, Scream would break up, and when this happened in 1990, Dave was invited to join Nirvana. The first record that Grohl would record with the band would be Nevermind, their 1991 release, which eventually rose to the top of the charts and gained international acclaim. The album represented a massive shift in the music industry both domestically and abroad, and birthed a genre that would go on to persist for the next decade called grunge, which eventually blossomed into the more pervasive genre of alternative rock, which resonated for decades to come. After Cobain's tragic death in 1994, Nirvana could no longer continue. While initially discouraged by his friend's death and the possible loss of his favorite job, Grohl came out of his depression to record a brand new debut album called Foo Fighters, which compiled some songs that he had been writing for the past 3 years while in Nirvana, and also some that he had tracked after Cobain's death with friends in studios around Seattle and Washington, D.C. Grohl recorded all of the musical and vocal tracks on this debut album by himself, including his performances on drums, guitar, bass, and vocals. After the success of the album, Dave began to build a band around himself which would become the Foo Fighters that we know today. The band included his friend Taylor Hawkins, who was another drummer and talented vocalist who he believed had a kindred spirit with him, and former Nirvana member Pat Smear. The Foo Fighters retained the punk-inspired energy from Nirvana, but also introduced an element with a pop appeal with the vocals and melodies in the songs, blossoming into a new genre that would encapsulate many other bands of the area called alternative rock. Despite the massive success of the Foo Fighters, there was a good bit of infighting within the group in the early 2000s. This fighting led to a hiatus for the band. During this hiatus, Grohl got a call from one of his good friends, Josh Homme, who was the frontman for Queens of the Stone Age. They were recording their new record, Songs for the Deaf, and did not think that their current drummer could complete the album with them. Dave enthusiastically agreed to jump on board as the drummer for the record and for the next following tour cycle. Recording Songs for the Deaf was something of a return to form for Dave, as he found himself behind the drum kit once again. Songs for the Deaf was a massive success, and resulted in another evolution of alternative rock music spearheaded by none other than Dave Grohl and his newfound friends in Queens of the Stone Age. Grohl and the rest of the Foo Fighters eventually reconciled and continued to tour and make great records together. However, Grohl continued to branch out from his role as the frontman of the Foos with other creative projects. While he continued to play drums and tour with various side projects, he had one project he felt was necessary to undertake once the opportunity presented itself. Around 2010, the studio in which Nirvana had recorded Nevermind, called Sound City, had closed its doors. When Dave heard about this, he immediately thought of the unique quality in sound that only the mixing board in that studio could provide, and how much it added to the quality and success of Nevermind. In order to preserve the ability to record records with that kind of quality, he bought the board from the studio when they went out of business. The board was created by world-class engineer Rupert Neve, and it is one of 4 of its kind on the planet. In the documentary Grohl directed called Sound City, Grohl details him building a studio around the board and why musicians who had recorded with this board had felt such a connection to the sound it produced. The board had been used to record countless other classic records other than Nevermind, such as Fleetwood Mac's Rumors and Grateful Dead's Terrapin Station. In order to capture a new record on this board, Dave invited back musicians who had recorded with the board before, such as Fleetwood Mac's Stevie Nicks, Sir Paul McCartney, Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age, and Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick, just to name a few. The resulting record, Sound City Reel to Reel, acted as a sort of love letter to the recording techniques of old and to the analog style that had produced so many great records over the years and had defined the genre. In his many creative roles that Dave has played over the years, he has acted as a sort of conservator and innovator in the genre of alternative rock, grunge, and punk, and perhaps the greater rock genre as a whole. He continues to create new music that pushes the alternative genre forward, and also finds time to preserve and maintain the sounds and the quality that had made his music and countless other musicians before him so successful.